Hey, what's going on, guys? We are a little over a week away from UFC 298, Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. And while this card is crazily stacked with amazing fights from top to bottom, and it's one of the best pay-per-view main cards of the last year, there are still some reasons that I hate UFC 298, and this is going to be my top 3 reasons I hate UFC 298. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being the number 1 reason I hate UFC 298, and the number 1 reason is absolutely devastating. But let's start off with the first honorable mention, and that is that Ikram Aliskerov versus Anthony Hernandez was canceled. I just want to see Ikram fight. Ikram has a lot of hype behind him. There's been multiple big fights announced for him. First, it was Paulo Costa, which I knew wasn't going to happen. Then he was booked against Nasruddin Imavov. Then that got canceled because Imavov pulled out. And then now he's supposed to fight Anthony Hernandez, which wasn't as good as the other 2 fights. But then he has to pull out. I think he had some type of injury of some sort. So I'm just disappointed. The replacement fight that we got against Roman Kopylov versus Anthony Hernandez is a really good fight. But it's just disappointing. I want to see Ikram fight. I want to see him move his way up the ranks. I want to see him tested. He's looked so good. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, a lot of bad luck has happened, and we haven't been able to see Ikram Aliskerov fight recently. Moving up to my next honorable mention, and that is that this card is so good, and I talked about this in a recent video, but this card is so good, the Apex cards that we are going to be getting shortly are just going to be absolutely awful. I mean, 298 stacked, 299 is stacked, and 300 is stacked. I thank the UFC for that. I love the UFC doing that. But these Apex cards are so ugly. We already have a couple ugly Apex cards. I mean, Jack Hermanson, Joe Pyfer tomorrow isn't really all that good. The card from last week wasn't that good. Then coming up, we got like Tai Tuivasa, Marcin Tybura, Rose Namajunas versus Amanda Ribas. And it's what happens when we have some of these really stacked pay-per-views. The Apex cards, because the UFC doesn't have to sell tickets, are just they just end up being really terrible because they don't have a lot of talent to put on it because they're really building up the pay-per-view cards. So it's a minor complaint, but I wanted to mention it as an honorable mention. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is during the fight week for UFC 298, a main topic of discussion is going to be Ian Machado Garry's love life. I'm just tired of hearing about it. I don't care about really any fighter's personal life. And then we have a lot of, obsessed fans. And I know Ian Machado Garry isn't very likable. I understand that. But you have people making up fan fiction just because they don't like a certain fighter and some things that he says. We have to. There's plenty of things that you can say truthfully about Ian Machado Garry and, discredit him or say, he looks like an asshole here. But people are just making up random lies about him and his wife and bringing his wife into the situation and then kind of using qualifiers and say, oh, well, she was a part of this video and she did this and she did that. I'm just... when I was younger, I kind of enjoyed more of the drama aspect of fight buildups. But now the way it's kind of gone down the slippery slope of Leon Edwards and Colby Covington and his dead father. And then you had Strickland and his former child abuse. And some of the stuff Strickland says advocating for child abuse. And then you have, just different things brought up about people's families. Conor and Habib from years ago talking about his father. I just don't like, that slippery slope that we're going down. And when you have a card that's as stacked as UFC 298, you have a lot of the best versus the best. And I'd rather talk about that and be excited about that rather than some random drama kind of made up fan fiction about Ian Machado Garry this and, talking about, oh, he wore this shirt about, Geoff Neal drinking and driving. I mean, that's another thing. Geoff Neal, who knows? He may end up, pulling out of the fight. He missed weight against Shavkat. I think he pulled out of his last fight where he's supposed to fight Ian Machado Garry. And who knows, he might be out drinking and driving this week. So he might get busted and end up pulling out of the fight again. So there's another honorable mention. Throw that in there. But I'm just not looking forward to the weird drama-esque buildup of Ian Machado Garry versus Geoff Neal. If it was a lackluster card, it's like, okay, we got something to kind of talk about. But because the card's so stacked, I hate that a lot of these really high quality matchups are going to get overshadowed with that discussion. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with number 3, and that is Merab Dvalishvili versus Henry Cejudo. That's a great fight. I understand that a lot of people are looking forward to that fight. If you've been watching my channel for any period of time, I am a strong advocate for as close to a meritocracy as we can get. And the fact that Sean O'Malley is fighting Marlon Chito Vera at UFC 299 is a disgrace. It is a complete and utter disgrace. Marlon Vera is one of my favorite fighters. 2 fights ago, he got dominated by Corey Sandhagen. 1 fight ago, he barely squeaked by Pedro Munoz. And he's getting the title shot. Meanwhile, you have Merab coming off a domination of Piotr Yan, the same Piotr Yan that Sean O'Malley got a robbery win against. I'm sounding like Colby Covington now, stuttering over my words and mispronouncing them. Coming off a win against Jose Aldo before that. Jose Aldo is still very good. Win before that against Marlon Moraes. At the time, it was decent. I mean, he's on this crazy long winning streak. There's no debate. Merab Dvalishvili is the #1 contender. And I know people are going to say down in the comments, and when I talk about it throughout this week, people are going to say, Merab turned down a title shot. That is a false narrative. Merab never turned down a title shot. He was never in the position to fight for the title while Aljamain Sterling was the champion. You had Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo already lined up. They already knew the #1 contender was Sean O'Malley. Merab never turned down a title shot. I don't want to hear that narrative at all. And it's just unfortunate that we have Sean O'Malley. The UFC really truly wants to build into a star. And because of that, they're already allowing him to duck contenders in his literal first title defense. And it's really disappointing. It's really disturbing. And you got Henry Cejudo, who talk about fumbling the bag, which has been a narrative for a while about different fighters. Henry Cejudo truly fumbled the bag. Dude retired in 2020 as a negotiating tactic, and not a single fan or the UFC gave a rat's ass. And he finally returned, had a decent showing against Aljamain Sterling, but still lost the decision, and it was not a robbery by any means. And, like, why are we getting Henry Cejudo versus Merab? Merab's arguably #1 contender on this long winning streak. Henry Cejudo hasn't won a fight since 2020. Coming off a loss, already got a title shot. So I truly believe the UFC is protecting Sean O'Malley preemptively. And they're thinking, you know, Merab's one of the worst style matchups for O'Malley. And I'm not even saying O'Malley couldn't beat Merab, but they're thinking, let's see if Henry Cejudo can knock off Merab. And that way we don't even have to worry about Merab making his way up the ranks. But I'm just disappointed overall that we're not getting the rightful #1 contender against the champion. I would be much more excited. I understand Sean O'Malley, Marlon Chito Vera has got a lot of backstory. I'd be much more excited for the main event of UFC 299 if it was Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. I think that's a much more compelling matchup. And stylistically, it's very fun because Merab's super sloppy on the feet. Sean O'Malley doesn't have the best takedown defense. It'd be very interesting. Plus the stamina. You know, I would love to see how O'Malley's stamina would match up against Merab and that relentless pressure. So I'm just disappointed. We have the #1 contender fighting the dead body of Henry Cejudo. That's a bit of an exaggeration. He's not actually a dead body, but you get my point. Instead of fighting for the actual belt, when you have another guy who is on a 1-fight winning streak getting the title shot because the UFC just wants to sell pay-per-views and O'Malley wants to duck rightful #1 contenders. Moving on to my #2 reason I hate UFC 298. And, you know, there's a saying, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. And that's kind of what the #2 reason I hate UFC 298 is, because we are getting Michael Bisping on commentary. And what I say is, when I say be careful what you wish for, I always talk about how I can't stand Joe Rogan and he's a casual and all he does is, oh, and make his eyes pop out of his head and say, oh, he's compromised. Oh, he's compromised. The way he's holding that left leg, you know, he's definitely got an injury, speculating on injuries. And I really don't enjoy Joe Rogan's commentary anymore. And I always say, oh, I'm happy when Rogan's gone. I'm not happy that Rogan's gone. I wish Rogan was going to be at 298, because having Michael Bisping there is the worst possible replacement. Michael Bisping is atrocious. He makes corny jokes. He scores fights live, and he does a completely horrible job of it. I mean, he has no idea of the scoring criteria. He says the dumbest crap during the fights. And I just can't stand Michael Bisping on commentary. Half the time, he's having like these weird offshoot conversations with other commentators instead of actually talking about the action in the cage. He doesn't know the rules. He doesn't know the scoring criteria. And it drives me nuts. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And Michael Bisping, and I don't take this lightly, okay? I don't think this is an exaggeration, okay? Michael Bisping, I'm so frustrated I'm holding up my camera lens cover right now. That's how frustrated I am that Bisping's on commentary. Michael Bisping is literally the worst commentator in all the UFC. I'd rather Sanko. I'd rather Cruz. I don't like Cruz at all. He doesn't know the ruling on damage. He thinks if you get a cut in the 3rd round, then the judges are rescoring rounds 1 and 2. So it makes absolutely no sense. But Bisping just shouldn't be there. Just shouldn't be there. It's almost like he's in La La Land. He's not talking about the action. He's scoring fights horribly. And the worst thing about Bisping, and Rogan does this too, is he has trash narratives that he then pushes onto the masses. So then, like, it becomes popular opinion almost because they hear it on the broadcast. And then, you know, me as a person who covers the fights and talks about them in different videos and whatnot, you're like, oh, no, Joey, you're wrong. Bisping said this. Bisping said that. And it just drives me nuts. Bisping should never be on commentary. I hate Bisping's commentary. I don't like Rogan's commentary either, but it's a lot better than Michael Bisping. And I'm just not looking forward to Michael Bisping being on the commentary team for UFC 298. Moving on to my number one reason I hate UFC 298. And this is kind of a two-layer. I thought about breaking it apart, but then I said, you know what? I'll just put them together because I already have plenty of reasons to hate on UFC 298. Again, you know, I don't even know if I said this in the beginning. I think I did. I love UFC 298. Okay, I love it. It's a stacked card. I make this video for every single pay-per-view as long as I have time. But the number one reason I hate UFC 298 is this may truly be Alexander Volkanovski's downfall. That's kind of part one. Part two is if Ilia Topuria wins the featherweight belt, he's not going to fight contenders. He's already saying, I'm not fighting this guy. I'm not fighting that guy. He's already calling out Conor McGregor. You have Sean O'Malley who's talking about if he beats Marlon Vera and Topuria wins, he wants to fight Topuria. So we have an utter calamity at bantamweight and featherweight where you have champions who don't want to defend against contenders. And that's the thing I hate more than anything in the world. If you tell me, you know, people say, oh, Joey, you hate Colby Covington because I always trash Colby for all the dumb shit that he says and the fact that, you know, he doesn't even have any quality wins. If you told me Colby's going to win the belt and be active and defend against contenders, I want Colby as champion. Ilia Topuria, I've been high on for a while. I love watching him fight. If he's going to win the belt and call out Conor McGregor, I don't want to see him as champ. I don't want to see him as champ at all. But in terms of the first part, Alexander Volkanovski's been on top for so long. He's been on top for so long. And I know he's lost at lightweight. And I know he got KO'd in his last fight against Islam Makhachev. But, you know, these guys, when they're in a special moment in time, we don't appreciate them. And I know there's a lot of people, I talk about this all the time about different champions. We don't appreciate them when they're in the true prime of their careers. And then it's just gone like that. At the drop of a hat, at the snap of a finger, it's just gone. And the beginning of that could have been the Islam Makhachev KO. We don't know that for sure, but if he goes out there and let's say he gets chinned by Ilia Topuria, we know for sure. We know for sure at that point, and that'll be devastating. I mean, Volkanovski is one of the most elite of all time. He's a GOAT of the sport. I mean, his resume speaks for itself. He's never lost at featherweight. You know, 2 of his 3 losses in his entire MMA career against Islam Makhachev, one on short notice, the other very competitive fight against Islam Makhachev at UFC 284. I still thought he lost. But you look at his resume, I mean, stopping Yair Rodriguez, beating the dog shit out of Max Holloway in the trilogy, beating the crap out of the Korean Zombie, beating up Brian Ortega. People act like that was such a compelling, competitive, exciting fight, even though Brian Ortega had 1 submission attempt, basically, or 2 submission attempts in 1 round. Other than that, he got dominated from bell to bell. Multiple wins over Max Holloway, wins over Jose Aldo, wins over Chad Mendez. His UFC career speaks for itself. Only 2 losses against lightweight champion in his prime, Islam Makhachev, one of the greatest, in my opinion, greatest lightweights of all time, on the way to kind of stake his resume. And I just feel like you look at Volkanovski, and it's almost like you never see it coming. And this one, I know a lot of people are kind of counting Volkanovski out a little bit. And I think it's because of the KO against Islam. But even if you forget about the KO against Islam, it happens to them all. You know, you never see it coming, and then it just happens so quick. And then you're like, damn, we're never going to see Volkanovski fight the way he fought at one point in time. Volkanovski isn't the elite of the elite. Look at the way it happened to Tony. We never knew, like, going into that Justin Gaethje fight. I even predicted Gaethje to beat Tony Ferguson. We never knew that was going to be the end of him forever. Now he's on like a 17 million fight losing streak. And it's just sad that, you know, you come to the realization their prime is past, their peak, you know, their peak in their skill set is past, and you'll never get to witness it again. And if Volkanovski goes out there and gets KO'd by Topuria, gets finished by Topuria, or even just gets outclassed by Topuria, no matter what, that's the end of Volkanovski. You know, he can still fight, but the Volkanovski that we know and love, the special moment in time, it's gone. And that's why I've talked about it. You can go watch other videos where I'm talking about Volkanovski, and I'll say the same thing. Like, we have to appreciate him in that moment in time. So I hate UFC 298 because this may truly be the end for Volkanovski. He gets KO'd in this fight. He's coming off 2 KO losses. I mean, look how fast it happened to Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman's winning, you know, dominating Leon Edwards, gets head kick KO'd, comes back, loses a decision. Now he's on a 3-fight losing streak, lost to Khamzat Chimaev. And, you know, it's just crazy how fast, in the blink of an eye, from elite of the elite, one of the GOATs in the sport, to all of a sudden falling off a cliff. It happens all the time and you don't realize it. So I'm going to hate if that happens to Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 298. And also, obviously, the part that I already touched on, if Ilia Topuria wins, I like Ilia Topuria. He's not going to fight contenders. He just doesn't seem like he's interested. He's like, I'm not fighting Holloway. I'm not fighting Ortega, which he shouldn't fight Ortega. Ortega's been squatting on his ranking. And who else? I think he said he's not fighting Yair either. It's just, you can just tell he's looking for money fights, quote-unquote money fights, and he's begging for a Conor McGregor fight. It's just disturbing, and I don't want to see that at all. So if Topuria wins and is not willing to fight contenders, I don't want to see him be champion at all. I hate when you have champions who don't want to defend their belts. So that is my number one reason I hate UFC 298. Are there any reasons that should have been on this list that I missed? Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of my reasons. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.